Okay, here is the video lecture part A that goes with chapter 3 for urban sociology at West Virginia State University. We're going to talk about social behavior, and we're going to tie this in with our discussion of social psychology. First, we'll talk a little bit about prejudice. Prejudice is a negative attitude toward members of some social group based upon their membership in this group. And we're going to be spending some time talking about prejudice and stereotypes. Now, prejudice can lead to discrimination. A prejudice is an attitude. Discrimination is a behavior or the actions of people stemming from prejudices and stereotypes. Prejudice and discrimination come from bias. Now, bias can be on purpose or it can be unintentional. So, by definition, bias is an intentional or unintentional inclination that works either for or against someone or something. So, you can be biased or prejudiced in a positive way toward groups of people, or more commonly, like we think of, in a negative way against specific groups of people. And we can apply all of these concepts to our discussion of urban sociology. Now, I want to talk a little bit now about the origins of prejudice. Where does prejudice come from? There are 4 categories that I want to discuss. Direct intergroup conflict, social categorization, social learning, and then the cognitive sources of prejudice. And we'll take all 4 of these separately. And we'll start with direct intergroup conflict. Here, competition is seen as a source of bias. I want to adjust my camera a little bit, make sure that we can get it all in there. I think I got it. There we go. So, competition, again, is seen as a source of bias. Bobo in 1983 proposed what he called realistic conflict theory. This theory proposes that prejudice, in part, comes from competition between social groups over valued commodities or opportunities. And certainly in cities, you can see if you want to break down groups in terms of different races or ethnicities, certainly there is competition between these different groups of people over valued commodities or opportunities, whether it's attention or money or funding for programs or for buildings or for restaurants, whatever the case may be. That competition can create prejudice between those groups of people in cities. As competition persists, members of each social group involved come to view other groups in increasingly negative ways, and then they view themselves as increasingly superior. So they tend to, again, look at outsiders as being bad, if you will, and insiders or people within the in-group as being superior. Applying this some more, applying direct intergroup conflict to urban sociology, different enclaves. An enclave is a portion of territory within or surrounded by a larger territory whose inhabitants are culturally or ethnically distinct. Every major city has several enclaves. Like if you go to New York City, you have Little Italy, you have Little Russia, you have Little China. You have these little pockets of ethnic groups who maintain their homelands or their home countries' culture and values, norms, beliefs, etc. And they can compete with each other, like we just talked about, for resources and commodities within a city. And that invites in-group solidarity. In other words, people who are like them, who are very similar to them in culture, language spoken, etc., etc. They tend to feel strengthened in the presence of one another and exhibit prejudices toward people who are in out-groups or not a part of their group. Social categorization. This is the next thing we want to talk about. This involves our tendency to divide the social world between 2 groups, us and them. And we all have a tendency to do this regardless of whether we're talking about cities or really anywhere. Teachers versus students, parents versus children, Republicans versus Democrats, urbanites versus people who live in the rural areas or the countryside. So we just kind of have a tendency to divide the world socially up in that way. Another example of social categorization, upper class versus the poor in cities. Those in the upper class tend to view people in the lower class more negatively, assuming members of the lower class in cities are more dangerous, lazy, uneducated, unintelligent, and or unsophisticated, when that certainly may or may not be the case. Upper class versus the poor in cities. Those in the upper class tend to view individuals in their own class more positively, assuming members of their own upper class are, well, less dangerous, motivated, educated, intelligent, and sophisticated. And again, that may or may not be the case, but people within their own group tend to view themselves more positively and those outside of their group more negatively. To sum it up, people in the us category tend to be viewed more favorably, again, whereas those in the them category tend to be viewed more negatively. Social learning. This is the next category. Social learning perspective on the origins of prejudice asserts that prejudice is actually learned from others around us. I never will forget being in college watching an episode of Jerry Springer, and there was a child, he couldn't have been more than 2 years old. He was standing on the stage, and he was a member of the Klan, and he had on the costume, if you will, and was espouting hatred for women, for African Americans, for Jews. I mean, he said some of the most disgusting things I've heard a child say in my life. They couldn't bleep him fast enough. And behind him, you had father and grandfather, who were also members of the Klan, encouraging him. They were positively reinforcing this behavior. So certainly prejudice can be learned. The sources of prejudice include the media. And when you look at cities, a lot of people think of cities, even still today, as being very dangerous places. And that, again, may or may not be true. Certain parts of cities are safe, relatively speaking, while certainly parts of cities could be unsafe. But the media portrays cities sometimes in a negative light. Parents, the internet, friends, these are all sources of prejudice. Social learning suggests that prejudice can be positively reinforced, like we just talked about with the young child who was a member of the Klan, and was associated with the Klan, I guess I should say. Was being positively reinforced. These prejudices, whether they're prejudices about the city, good or bad, or anything for that matter, can be reinforced by these people. Cognitive sources of prejudice. Prejudice stems partly from basic aspects of social cognition and stereotypes. Social cognition, this is the process through which we notice, store, remember, and later use social information. Earlier in the class, we talked about attention and the different types of attention that we can pay. When you're in cities, there tends to be more of what's called stimulus overload. There is a lot of visual and auditory stimuli to process, and you don't notice everything. You can't store it all, and you can't remember it all. But we can do the best that we can, and the way that we go about processing this information in cities is going to impact largely our perception of the city. Now, stereotypes. Stereotypes are cognitive frameworks suggesting that all members of social groups share certain characteristics. Certain cities have certain stereotypes, and we've kind of talked about that a little bit. San Francisco, California, is stereotyped as being, the quote-unquote homosexual city in the United States. Well, there are homosexuals who live in every city in this country, and there are parts of San Francisco where homosexuals are not predominant. So, I mean, there you have that. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is stereotyped as being, the steel city. Lots of hardworking, blue-collar, nose to the grindstone kind of people. Well, and you have people who are very artistic. You also have homosexuals in Pittsburgh. I mean, so again, cities can be stereotyped fairly or unfairly. And we also have stereotypes of just the city in general. we think of them as being dangerous places. They're all dangerous. They're all big. Everybody speaks a foreign language. Nobody cares about you. Everybody's rude. Well, those are all, again, stereotypes. To drive home the idea of stereotypes, it's kind of fun to do this. You can look at the gentleman on the left and you would automatically assume, you would stereotype this guy. You would automatically assume that his favorite kind of music is, go ahead and think about it, country music. His favorite sport would be what? NASCAR, football. What kind of flag does he have hanging up in the back of his truck? Probably. You thinking a rebel flag? Probably. Okay. So again, those are stereotypes. Maybe this guy's a florist who likes classical music. You never know. The guy on the right. Now, what can we assume about this guy? Is he smart? How is he with relationships with women? What kind of job does he have? What kind of music does he listen to? Does he listen to rap music? Is he a florist? Or was he likely a member of the chess club in high school? So again, we come up with these ideas. You know, the stereotype of the on the left of the ditzy blonde cheerleader. I mean, we still have these preconceived notions about someone based upon their perceived membership in a group, and this is just exacerbated in cities. The gentleman on the right. I mean, people would probably start to assume several things about this guy. I asked class previously what they thought about the guy on the right. They all immediately said, oh, he's been in jail, he has 8 kids, he has a grill, like gold teeth, you know, just he likes rap music. And again, we don't really know these things, but it's easier to stereotype. The jock, the male athletes here on the left, we assume that these guys are not bright, that maybe they don't treat women well, that they're kind of given a pass through school because they're good at sports. And again, we don't know this to be true. So we stereotype groups of people. We stereotype cities as well. How might we stereotype people in the upper classes in cities? When you see rich people, or who you think are rich people, walking the streets in major cities, what do you assume to be true about them? Are they snobby? Are they just kind of stuck up? Do they not care about anything but money or themselves? How might we stereotype poor people in cities? Something to think about. Do we stereotype them as being dangerous or unmotivated, mentally ill? Research on stereotypes indicates that information relevant to a particular stereotype is processed more quickly than information not related to it. Stereotypes also lead us to pay attention to specific types of information, usually information consistent with the stereotypes. When information that's not consistent with a stereotype does manage to enter into our awareness, it may be simply denied or refuted. Also, when we encounter people who behave in ways that go against stereotypes, instead of dismissing the stereotype, we often perceive this as a new subtype of that stereotype, instead of making an exception to the existing stereotype. So these stereotypes and prejudices are very strong and very firmly rooted within our way of thinking. And we'll go ahead and stop this here and call this the end of part A. Thank you.